Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston with my co-host Brian Tankersley, and we would like to talk to you about this year's Startup Accelerator program from the AICPA and CPA.com. Now, the Accelerator program's been running for 8 years. Last year, the focus was all around AI products. And this year, it seemed that most of the products that made it in had some sort of a CAS focus. That's not 100% true, but it is a pretty good start. And what we'd like to do today is just give you an overview of the vendors that made it in and that were announced on Wednesday, March 12th of 2025. Now, I have always been impressed with these founders, and what I want to do is just provide a little bit of an overview on these products. Brian and I hope to interview, use the products, and talk about them in future technology labs like we did in prior years. So we'll have more details to follow. But in the meantime, you may want to take a look at these. So first, I'd like to start with a company called Avise. Avise is still relatively small with 8 employees. They were founded in 2020 by Graham Stanton and Edgar Thomas. Avise is a month-in close process, and it is bi-directional with QuickBooks Online and NetSuite. Now, we know of a number of online close products, and we've covered those in other technology labs, the Flowcasts and the Trendtex and so forth. And there's many organizations, exactly, Blackline and Classic, many classic products trying to solve this problem and many products trying to solve it. Now, in the context of CAS, when you're working inside your firm trying to handle many clients with your relatively small team, these type of tools can help you notably. So, Brian, I think if you take note on this, on the problem that they are actually solving, where they're really going after the manual, repetitive tasks of accounting, that's a pretty good call out. And, I think about the way you've talked about doing CAS workflows in the past. But, this particular vendor, I think, has a chance of helping with the close process and CAS practices.
Yeah, and I think that close tool is a critical tool that people don't realize they need until they get this, because it does make such a huge difference in the productivity. Because again, you set up the check, it's very similar to a digital checklist. I mean, you set up the checklist, you set up the tasks, and then you have some digital automation to handle some of the work that's associated with it. So it's a pretty exciting tool set, but nobody really talks about the use of these tools in here. But most of the people I know that are in industry could not imagine a world when they went back to not having these kinds of tools.
Yeah, and one of the things that they drive off of is a set of work papers where they can handle, and automate tasks like amortization, depreciation, multi-entity consolidation, and variance analysis, just to name some fundamentals. But as you and I have looked at other trial balance products and workflow products, trying to get this all in a single platform, it's not trivial to do. I think this is a good starting point. We'll talk more about Avise later.
And the other thing I would say here is that it's also very difficult in these kinds of platforms to get the engineers to let the accountants be accountants and do it the accounting way, instead of trying to re-engineer the whole thing. And there's some value to doing the re-engineering thing, but in so many cases, since they don't understand the why to accounting, just like you and I don't understand, just like I don't understand anyway the why to everything in engineering. I think it's important to be careful here, because again, I've seen many of these products go sideways when the engineers take over, and then they create a product that nobody understands and nobody can use.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that then drives us to maybe the next tool in the list, and that is called Filed. Now, this particular platform currently is reporting 35 employees, founded in 2024 by Leroy Carey and Kamyar Espabodi. Now, these guys are trying to get tax preparation done in an automated way. They've been flying under the radar for a few months. August of 2024 was when they were founded, and they are processing at this point and in this season tens of thousands of tax returns, and they're out now going to do some fundraising. Now, the field's unique AI is designed for firm-specific customization, which really focus on a couple areas: the speed of feedback to improve the collaboration between the customer and AI. Now, customer in this case is really referring to you, the firm, okay? And personalized security. And then the platform itself is then uniquely tailored to your firm's workflow and security measures. Now, the evolution of this platform, and I'm not going to give you the history that I know because I'm not sure that's actually public information, is an interesting evolution in their capabilities. And what I think they'll be able to do for the profession is good. But if you listen in on our AICPA, CPA.com summit presentation, we point out that 70% of AI is easy, accuracy, and 100% is hard. And these guys are going after an area where accuracy of 100% is required and hard. So, Brian, other things that you might mention about Filed?
The interesting part about this is how they're attacking this. We've looked at a number of different tools that are doing AI based tax prep, and they're some of them work, some of them don't, but they all have to have humans looking at things on the back end, because they inevitably get off track and start doing things they shouldn't do, or they start doing things that are inaccurate, because they don't have the context necessarily required that a human would have. So I think this gives me a lot of hope here, because I don't like sending this stuff offshore. Now, the thing that also gives me quite a bit of pause surrounding some of the PE acquisitions is that it seems like, if you read between the lines, it seems like some of these mega acquisitions are pushing more and more of the work offshore as opposed to doing it onshore. And so the AI would supplant some of the offshore work, but the challenge here is that I think we've got to look at this and decide whether or not we want the accounting profession to work that way. But
Yeah.
it's an interesting
And
time. Sure.
yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Brian, but that whole BPO and the 7216 disclosure and offshoring, I've been watching the numbers there, and I am convinced that AI could preserve this work onshore, which is
Yeah.
interesting. And Filed is one of three vendors that I'm aware of that's trying to get this done for tax. And collaterally, just an observation, but without fact. This is, so I want you to hear, it's a guess, it's an observation. I believe these people could actually produce tax software to compete with CCH, Thomson Reuters, Intuit, Drake. Uh,
and
but
and that's the interesting piece, because the tax oligopoly has been something that has driven accounting professionals crazy for years. They most of them say at the end of tax season, "Oh, I'm switching to something else," but then they start looking at things and realize that the grass is only greener over the septic tank, as the late great Irma Bombeck says. So I think it's important here to again keep things in perspective, that I think it's possible they'll create a new engine, but again, the challenge of creating something that has to be right 100% of the time is hard. And so I hope that they can create a new engine, because it's something that would be very interesting to be sure.
Well, and one of the things that is a fallacy is so many of the companies think about federal tax and then pretty much ignore state level requirements. And that's a no-win as I would see it. And admittedly, there are some states that have very simple filings, but there are some that have very complex. And then you go down to local. I mean, this really is a hard problem to solve, and I respect people that want to try it. That's for sure. Well, that probably brings us to the next product. And I spoke with Ben Stein in the last week before we recorded this. So I've known Keeper for quite some time, as it turns out. I've recommended it to a lot of my clients out there, and I think they're making pretty good progress. Keeper is currently running about 50 employees. They've been around since 2025, so they got a 5-year run as they stand right now. And Keeper has several different characteristics about it that I think is interesting to know. But bottom line is, what are they? They call themselves a practice management solution. I think that's true, although I'd position them a little bit different. They integrate into QuickBooks, into Xero, into Sage, and they control the workflows, the request list, the portal, and so forth on all of this. Now, they are also working on AI for bookkeeping work throughout the close, and they are doing AI-powered bank feeds. And of course, the US bank feeds are very difficult compared to global bank feeds. And if they can actually get that done, that's a pretty big deal. So the main problems that they've been working on are automating the accounting work to keep it efficient. That's where I've deployed this product in my firms, is to try to get up efficiency, and a single platform to watch the workflow, the close cycle, and monitor the open tasks. So, Brian, what else would you say?
Well, I think, I think again, it's another great example of a tool that's designed to handle this close process, monthly close process or quarterly close process for clients. It's I think this one is designed, a lot of the ones we talked about earlier, like Blackline and Flowcast and Trinitech, are aimed at mid-market companies that have, $10+ million in sales. This tool, though, is really looking more at QuickBooks Zero and Sage, and looks to be really focusing in on practitioners that are doing this on a public basis for multiple fee-paying clients. And so I think this looks like he's going after the lower end, the startups and the smaller businesses as opposed to the bigger ones. And so I think it's, and again, it's designed to be used in firms. So I think that's the differentiation that I would put in here related to this.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that often happens with these entrepreneurs when they start up, they were trying to run their own business, and they worked in QuickBooks and were using an accounting outsource firm. They had some board reporting they had to do, and things were painful, but they became acute when they were scaling up their business. And so they realized that these month-end close that we've been talking about, the management of the CAS team, the internal firm and external client collaboration, and other things were a real pain. They just integrated to email, which is still obviously a major communication tool. So, when everything is said and done, this is another story of, man, I'm having this pain. Has nobody solved this problem yet? I can't find anybody that's solved this problem. I can't believe nobody's solved this problem. Well, I guess I'll try to solve this problem. And that really was kind of where Ben took me through the process. Again, I've known the company for a while, but that was a pretty interesting side story. So that brings us to the next accelerator company, Remedian. Now, it turns out we have talked to Jay and Salon. Now, Salon Angel, that name might strike a bell for you because he was one of the founders for MindBridge as well. So the audit tool, which was an early entry into AI. Now, Remedian has 17 employees. They've operated in Canada for quite some time. They started in 2021. They're trying to break into the US market. And the concept is quite simple. They believe that excessive late payments made by taxpayers in the United States to the tune of $65 billion is a problem. They think that the time that CPA firms and public professionals are spending on this, somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes a year assisting with tax payments. The very difficult way to submit government portals, and of course, with the recent executive order, no checks are going to be permitted with very few exceptions to the government. Everything's going to have to be done through ACH. So that'll aggravate the problem, I think, a little bit further. And this whole thing, we just needed a way to get tax payments made. And that's what these guys have built with Remedian is a tax payment system that they consider a one-click experience. So you basically can set up your tax payments, your quarterlies, and your actual dues and submit them through this platform. That's the basic concept. So, Brian, I know you've known Salon for a while. I know you've sat in on the Remedian calls as well. Any other things that you would call out that I might not have said?
No, I think we're in good shape here. The due date tracking and the reminders and all these other things are really, really important here. Now, are they going to replace EFTPS in the long run? I don't think so. Okay, I think you're still going to be in EFTPS, but at least you'll have a workflow tracking tool that will help you track and then get all of the information related to the payments that folks are making. Um, I'm I'm quite excited about getting that fixed.
All right. Well, that turns our attention then to tabs. Now, this company's founder was Ali Hussein, and Caitlin Liu also represented the company. They currently have 50 employees and have been around since 2023. What do they do? Well, they're an AI-driven revenue automation program, and they're basically trying to handle everything from customer contract management and billing to revenue recognitions, renewals, and audits. And so, in effect, many of you in public practice have tried to solve this with engagement letter automation. Here, we're trying to work across AR and other revenue reporting and prevent some of the leakage. The other thing that the platform is designed to do is to make sure that 606 compliance is being done properly along the way. So now, Brian, other key things that you would maybe add in this, and maybe one thing I didn't position as well is this was really targeted at CAS practices as opposed to CFOs themselves. And there is an opportunity, as we know, not only in payables, but over here in receivables. And I think that's the part that they're trying to handle because many of you who provide CAS services don't want to do payroll. You're willing to take payables. Well, what about the other side, the receivable side? So other,
Yeah, and just kind of generally looking at this, quite excited about it ingesting the customer documents to surface all of this information in here. I think that in so many ways, one of the biggest things that AI can do for us is going through and summarizing data and then looking at processes and then doing the process analysis or I guess the after action workflow analysis. And I think generally by looking at this, um, I think they've got some I think they've got some very valuable tools in here that can really make a big difference for firms that decide to use it.
yeah, so, their claim is they can take DSO from the average of 60 days 20 days on average down. So whatever your DSO is, reduce it by 20 days. That's a big deal. And I won't disclose my DSO in the technology lab, but it's really short. And I've always been cognizant of that since the 70s. Well, that turns us then to, another and the last Accelerator award winner this year, a group called TrueWind. Now, likewise, I've talked to Alex Lee, and who is one of the co-founders there. Richard Way also came along as the founding product manager on the product. Now, what does this do? Well, it is basically trying to develop an agentic AI solution that executes month-end close tasks. So I think this is the third time out of these groups that we've talked about, rapid close. This one, though, is agentic AI. And they basically deal with outstanding items and they handle the items that they can handle, but then they surface the agentic AI to the accountant professional to go back to the client or surface it back to the client to, resolve issues. So one could think about this as kind of a smart work paper upgrade from a spreadsheet. It also helps standardize reconciliation along the way. So those are probably some of the call outs for TrueWind. An interesting concept that they're working. And I'll ask you for your opinion here in a minute, Brian, but I'm just thinking about all of these accelerator program selections this year, all trying to optimize our workflows, many trying to go after close processes, each looking for a time pain point or a money pain point to solve, and making a good stab at it. And I always respect organizations that work along those lines. So any observations on TrueWind or closing thoughts for our listeners?
Well, I would just generally say that I'm quite excited to see this because I think that the we all know that the real innovation that's going to happen in accounting is not going to come from the big guys, I don't think. I think it's really going to come from startups like this. Because, again, you look at a big company, any big company, it's a Fortune 500 company, a lot of people there are going to work 40, 45 hours a week. And you just can't change the world working 40, 45 hours a week. Again, just listen to Elon Musk for a little bit. And so as we're looking at this, I just want to remind you that again, they're working with some very interesting folks that are doing very interesting kinds of automation. And I think it gives me some hope because I just don't see the level of innovation coming out of the other folks in the accounting profession, the monoliths. And so I'm quite excited to see these folks out there. Now, interestingly, TrueWind actually has received 17 million from Thomson Reuters Ventures, Row Capital, and Y Combinator. And so the interesting part here is that we're starting to see folks like Thomson and CCH acknowledge the thing I just said, and they're now starting to partner and or make investments in platforms like this as they're going through to try to help them through this. So I think there's some. I think that the future of accounting is very interesting. And I think it's going to be different than we think it's going to be today. I think the monoliths we have today will be completely different organizations than they were. I think back to our time talking to the folks at Thomson Reuters and how different the approach that Elizabeth and the tax and accounting division have today is compared to how they were just 5 years ago. And so it's a very exciting time, but the innovation is going to come from places where we didn't see it coming.
Well, there you've heard it from the expert. So it's always a pleasure, Brian, to talk with you and for our listeners in the Accounting Technology Lab. So that being the case, we appreciate you listening in, and we'll talk to you again soon in another Technology Accounting Lab. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.